Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Seed Speaks. My name is Ashley Robinson. I'm the editor of the Alberta Seed Guide, and I'll be acting as your host for this episode. On today's episode of Seed Speaks, we're going to talk about what you should keep in mind this spraying season and how rising production costs are factoring into those choices. We have a few guests here to discuss this with us, so thank you to Logan Romines and Michelle Klieger for joining us. To those watching, please don't hesitate to ask any questions you may have for our guests in the chat box. And let's quickly get started with getting to know our panelists quickly. So Logan, can you tell me a bit more about your work at Syngenta?
Yeah, absolutely, Ashley, and super happy to be here today. As Ashley said, my name is Logan Romines. I'm the row crop fungicide product marketing lead for the United States. So I handle our pricing and marketing strategy for our Depidin and Solatinol technologies and anything that will get sprayed from a fungicide standpoint in corn, soybeans, or wheat.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And Michelle, thank you so much for being here. Can you tell me a bit more about your work?
Sure. My name's Michelle Klieger. I am the president and founder of Stratagerm Consulting. I'm an agricultural economist, and I look at all aspects of the supply chain. A lot of time focused on the decisions farmers make across all crops and livestock, as well as following those supply chains to the consumer. So across agriculture, across commodities, looking at prices and demand and economics in general.
Thank you. And I think our guests can tell, our people watching can tell that we're going to have a good conversation. We got both sides of the coin covered here. So first off, Logan, what do you find is the main concern for farmers this year when it comes to spraying season here in North America?
Yeah, so Ashley, from our standpoint, it's really been twofold. You've got a lot of disease pressure that growers are really concerned about. We had a huge tar spot epidemic last year in 2021. That's got a lot of growers concerned on whether or not that disease will rear its ugly head again here in 2022 and what management practices growers need to plan on to take that into account. But then on the flip side of that coin, you've obviously got rising production costs. Growers are trying to understand and determine whether or not an application of fungicide, that math pencils, they get a positive ROI there. So they're really weighing out, the disease pressure, the stress mitigation ability of a fungicide in the field versus the rising input costs that they're dealing with every day on the farm.
Yeah, definitely. We're seeing a lot of that this year. It's not been the best. Can you guys hear me? Okay, sorry, I thought I was freezing there. And Michelle, what have you noticed about production costs related to chemicals for spraying this year? I know Logan mentioned that we're seeing a lot of issues there.
Yeah, so like most things in the economy right now, we are seeing a lot of price inflation and higher prices. So the new numbers came out this morning in the United States across the board. Over 9% inflation year over year. Canada is quickly catching up at 7.5%. But of that, energy and food are the largest, and those higher energy prices are impacting the price of actually manufacturing the chemistry as well as the transportation to get it to farmers or retailers. And so we are seeing continued disruption there. Originally, it was the energy prices towards the end of 2021 with COVID taking some mines out of production in China, low renewable energy in Europe, and a post-pandemic reopening, and now adding the war with Russia and Ukraine. That has just pushed prices even farther. I will say that something that is sort of has evolved and I think is even scarier for everyone is that it's not just higher prices right now. There are actually shortages. And so that those shortages, whether you have the inputs you need to actually make a product or a crop, is really critical. And it's making, everybody rethink when they purchase their inputs. And that is a different conversation than just trying to figure out how much more it's going to cost them last season.
Thank you. There's so much going on there. It's really it's not fun this year. So this is just a general question everyone wants to answer it. What do you think farmers should be focusing on first when it comes to the spring season? The threats in the fields or the threats in their pocketbooks?
Yeah, I think I'll jump in there, Ashley. I think that's really a chicken or the egg conversation. When we think about diseases like tar spot, southern rust, and we know the impacts that those two diseases and many others can have on a grower's yield at the end of the year, you really have to manage the threats in the field in order to mitigate the threats to the grower's pocketbook. With commodity prices in the robust position they're at right now, particularly on corn and soybeans, the math is actually very favorable. Talking with a lot of our customers here the last few weeks, many of them have said to their retail sales folks that there's never been a better time rather to have a conversation about fungicides with growers. And I would echo that sentiment. Again, corn, when I checked yesterday, was over $7. Beans north of 15. So there's really robust ROI to be had from a grower standpoint. But I think the growers really got to look at it in a lens of we've got to manage the threats in the field so that we can best manage our return on investment at the end of the year. Because I think we can all agree that if a grower's not making money at the end of the year, they're not going to be farming for very long.
And I would add to that in my intro, I didn't mention that I teach economics, and I will try not to bore you with the details. But what I would generally say here is that it's really breaking your decision making down, and so it's balancing that pocketbook and the field. And so asking the question, what is the next best alternative? Is the next best alternative not spraying? Is it spraying slightly less? Is it changing the concentration? Is it switching to a different maybe active ingredient or brand or something? And so it's not always all or nothing, but it is thinking about that next best alternative. This is what I want to do. What else can I do? And then, just like Logan explained, thinking about the cost of that and being very inclusive of the cost. So the labor, the fuel, we know that diesel is very high right now, as well as the cost of the chemistry. And adding all of those costs together, and then looking at the price that you're going to sell these commodities for and which one is higher. If you are making money, and if the price of the commodity is high enough to cover those costs, then you are going to want to continue. You are going to want to take those steps. If, however, the price of the inputs is now higher than what you're going to get, you really need to think about that. And so it's really comparing the cost to the yield loss you're going to get from a change from your ideal.
Thank you, Michelle. Those were all really good points. And I think building off of something you had said before is that we're also seeing supply industry concerns and that the supply chain constraints and everything. So can we just talk about what we're seeing there right now as farmers are trying to get those chemicals on their fields? Maybe Michelle, if you want to start, and then Logan, you can add your 2 cents afterwards.
Sure. So the supply chain itself, I'm pretty sure that you haven't been anywhere recently where somebody has not blamed the supply chain for something that you couldn't have or couldn't have right now. And so those constraints are coming in several different places. One, anything that's imported that's coming on container ship, there is a shortage of container ships. The amount of products coming into the North America is higher than the amount leaving, and it is expensive. There is a big premium on moving container ships right now. So that is slowing things down. There are backups at both international and domestic ports that are slowing things down. There is a shortage of truck drivers and other transportation pieces, as well as still COVID restrictions in different places around the world. And a lot of these products are not manufactured domestically, at least not 100%, because of the high prices and shortages and impact on food. There's a bigger conversation in the United States about how to bring more of that back, how to nearshore and increase production. But these shortages of containers, of labor, backups, imports, all of these things are leading to delays, and it's harder to get the product that you're looking for.
Yeah, Michelle hit on a lot of things that are my colleagues specifically in production and supply and others for other basic manufacturers are dealing with on a daily basis. And I can speak specifically for Syngenta. We're doing as many things as possible to mitigate those challenges. Things like air freight come to mind, express shipping lanes, things of that nature. But one thing I would also mention is we're also seeing an increase in the overall size of the market and demand for a lot of these products, not only in the agricultural sector, but the demand for these products. You think about AIs, but there's also various innards that go in these products that we're competing with other industries, paint, plastics, what have you. A lot of the innards that go into those products are similar innards that go into chemical products that a grower may use on his or her field. So we're competing with multiple industries for those innards. But I also think we've got to recognize that there's been an increase in demand, particularly for fungicides. Market research data would tell us that from 2020 to 2021, we treated an additional 9 million acres across corn, soybeans, and wheat combined. So there's been a bigger market size that's also caused some of these issues from a supply chain perspective.
That's all great.
Oh, sorry.
Michelle, please add your points there.
One of the other points I wanted to point out is just the psychology of inflation. And so inflation becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're worried about prices going up, you're going to buy more today, which creates this hoarding phenomenon, which is common in all goods. And so that could be something that is happening too right now, with the prices of a lot of these products increasing between 100 and 300%. There is a lot of fear that the price will keep going up and that farmers will be priced out of the market. So are they purchasing more today, storing it in inventory? So either they have it when they need it, if it's not available all the time right now, or before the price goes higher. And so that hoarding will also cause prices to go higher and shortages to show up.
All super interesting points there, Michelle. And I guess I just wanted to go off of something Logan had said there at the end. You're saying that we're seeing an increased demand for fungicides. Is that just because we're seeing increased production on soybeans and corn, or is there just people more using those products than they were in years past?
Yeah, I think if I go back to something Michelle had said, growers are sitting down and they're penciling the math on, fuel, application cost, cost of the product, things of that nature. And in the last 2 years, we've really hit a boom from a commodity price standpoint. So if we think back to where commodity prices have been historically, 2021, we really spiked, and we've seen that spike in commodity prices hold throughout the majority of 2022 so far. So the math, we've got data that says, hey, on average, a grower gets a 15 bushel yield advantage versus an untreated application section. So, if you figure corn is $7 at 15 bushels, that's $105, obviously minus your fuel cost, your application costs, things of that nature. But what growers are coming to find out is the math is making sense for them to make that application. Hence why we saw that big spike from 20 to 21 and why we're seeing increased demand from 21 to 22. We talk a lot about it internally and with our customers and with growers that, in times when input costs are increasing, the best thing a grower can do historically has been to grow more bushels on that acre. They've got to bushel their way out of increased input costs. Particularly with the fungicide, if we can make that math equation work, like Michelle spoke to earlier, we're actually able to lower our overall cost of production on that acre by growing more bushels.
That is all extremely interesting. I used to be a bit of a market journalist, so I'm really enjoying this tie-in to the commodity markets. And I think now we're going to take an audience question from Alex Martin Hahn on Facebook. And she says, well, we are specifically talking about spraying chemistries here. Have you guys also seen price increases for more precision application chemistries like seed treatments? I'll just throw it to whoever wants to answer first or has any knowledge.
I think jumping in, thinking about some of the things that Michelle referenced earlier, costs are increasing across the board for most basic manufacturers, whether you think about fuel and trucking, logistics, things of that nature. So basic manufacturers are having to increase prices on most things to compete with a rise in their COGS position. So we're really seeing across the industry an increase in price on most things to compete with a lot of the COGS increases or cost of goods that Michelle spoke to earlier, whether that be fuel, innards, active ingredient, what have you.
And it becomes a value-added product, I would say. If you are able to get some of the chemistry you're looking for on the seed and it changes how many passes you make in the field, or again, your yield output, this is something that growers are now demanding more of. And if because there is more demand, there's more room for prices to go up, but also it's competing to get that product. As we've talked about, there's been an expansion of acreage. There are different acres in play. All of this has changed what people have decided to grow. And as the math changes and as companies adapt, it's not always lined up correctly when planting season gets here. And so I could see a lot of those factors influencing what is available to farmers when they're ready to plant and at what price they would have to pay for those products.
Interesting. And let's switch things up a bit. And I think this will be more of a question that Logan will be able to help us with. Are there any specific weather or pest threats that are affecting farmers in North America this year when they're looking at making those spraying choices?
Yeah, absolutely, Ashley. The two big ones that come to mind are southern rust. We've had a pretty slow year on that so far, but typically that shows up in the southern United States, and we see that pop in Nebraska and Kansas. That's one that we haven't had huge issues with yet in 2022. Knock on wood that continues for our growers. But the other one, and the one that's really top of mind, is tar spot. And I know I mentioned that a little bit earlier, but that's a new disease that we're just starting to get our arms around in the industry. Really kind of showed up for the first time in 2018. And it's been a bit of a cyclical disease. The disease pressure isn't consistent every year, but we know we've seen it show up in areas like Wisconsin and Iowa and Indiana already this year. And growers can see a yield loss of up to 80 bushels in corn when we think about tar spot there. So that's one that's really top of mind. I've spoken with a lot of growers this year that are planning multiple fungicide applications across their cornfield to help deal with tar spot. So that's certainly one that comes to top of mind that a lot of growers, particularly in the corn belt, are thinking about and trying to figure out how they can best manage that disease.
Interesting. And I like how you said that they're upping fungicides, because then we get back into talking about how the prices are rising for those chemistries, but also the commodity prices have risen. So when you're looking at the pocketbook, it may still, if you're going to get that yield bump, it may still be profitable to do that. Yeah. And my next question, it's just, I think I'll throw it out to whoever wants to answer it. How should farmers budget long-term to protect themselves against production cost increases like we've seen this year? Because I feel like farmers are always thinking for the future. Yes, we're immediate reacting to what's happening, but they're also always thinking towards future growing seasons. So what could they do to kind of safeguard themselves if we see this continue on to next year, or we see it pop up again in the future?
I think because we've seen the prices go up consistently over the last few months, that most of us are in the mindset that prices are going to keep going up. So I would actually like to push back on that and say that my concern would be what happens when prices revert. They eventually will. They are, commodity markets are cyclical. It might take longer. But going back to that idea of prices are high, so you're buying extra, or there's shortages, so you're trying to buy more right now. My concern was if you buy more than you need for this growing season, that you're holding a lot of inventory. And inventory can be expensive to hold. You might have a higher price point than in the future. We don't actually know that prices are going to continue going up forever. And when prices do peak, I would be concerned that farmers are holding chemistry that is higher than the price of the production or the price that the commodities are selling for. And so now you're forced to produce for a loss or get creative because your inputs are higher and the market has reset. So I think that, the higher prices have forced us to act differently, and that farmers have adjusted the end of last season into this season, thinking about what they're growing, how they're growing, their expenses. But just a reminder that it's not always going to be like this. And so to assume that the price is going to go up forever could be a very dangerous situation for growers when it does ultimately reverse.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair challenge, Michelle. And one of the things we've talked a lot about, penciling the math on growers' input decisions. And I think growers would be really well served taking a look in the rearview mirror at the end of 2022 and looking back on the input decisions that they made on individual fields and understanding, hey, which of those input decisions really paid off for me and was of a benefit? Was that helped me be in the black at the end of the year? And which of those input decisions didn't make sense, or where can I make tweaks and changes and figure out what my best input decisions are going forward and kind of reestablish that baseline as we think about what 2023 could look like. The other thing we know is if a grower's got a good crop, he or she can be aggressive with things like foliar nutritionals, the fungicide application, really work to get the maximum out of that acre and kind of stick some of that in their pocketbook going forward to have a little bit more flexibility for years like 2023 and 2024, because who knows what's going to happen in those years. But I think growers are going to be challenged to really look at their input decisions and determine what makes the most sense. What did I do that was a wise input decision? And maybe what are some things that I need to look at cutting out or changing as I think about the 2023 growing season?
Really great points there. I think it's very important everything you said. And my last question, I think it's a good summary one, but also I think we've been answering it this whole time. So maybe just your last final points on what advice would you give to farmers this spraying season to keep in mind? Maybe Michelle, if we'll start with you, and then Logan, you can give your answer afterward.
Yes, I think that this is something that we've been talking about the whole time. So to sort of summarize, right now we have higher prices, and when that happens, consumers find ways to reduce their demand. And producers find ways to bring more online, and we all innovate. So I think it's taking some of the lessons from this year. How did you innovate? What changes did you make? Just like Logan said, did these treatments work well for you? Did you change crops at the last minute related to planting because you were trying to cut expenses? Were you able to do other creative changes on your farm to manage your input costs? And did those work well for you? And how do you want to bring those into the future? So a lot of times we see that disruptions it's hard to make behavioral changes. It's hard to try new things when everything is moving a status quo because we're comfortable. But right now, the environment has gone from very uncomfortable in 1819 with low commodity prices to uncomfortable because of really high input prices, but better because of high commodity prices now. And so how has your farm adapted? What changes have you made? And what is working? And then also just being aware that it's not always going to be like this. We do have really short memories about when prices were other than what they are today. I think that around us, the environment's going to continue to change. And so maybe more domestic supplies are going to come online and other new products, new diseases. And so, I don't know, I guess my advice is to continue to be flexible with what you're doing. If you've made it this far, you've got to be doing some things right. So trusting what you understand and learning about the pieces that you don't.
Yeah, I think that's a great lead in, Michelle, to where my head goes immediately. And I would encourage growers to work with their trusted advisor, whether that be their local retailer, an on-farm agronomist, a basic manufacturer, sales rep, what have you, to understand the ROI equation on their farm to determine, what makes sense in terms of applications I do or don't need to make. We talked a lot today about the robustness of commodity prices in 2021, and those are holding steady in 2022. My recommendation to the majority of the growers right now would be, if you've got a good crop, go ahead and run the math on that fungicide application. And I'd be willing to bet 9 times out of 10 that math is going to be favorable from an ROI standpoint. So I would encourage growers just to work with your trusted advisor, wherever that may be. Run the math on a fungicide application, a foliar nutritional application. I know we've got a lot of that market still in front of us yet here in 2022. And if that pencils, go ahead and pull the trigger on that. Work with your local retailer, like I said. or put that on yourself. But really, take a step, pause, slow down a little bit, run that math and see if that math pencils on your farm specifically.
Thank you guys so much. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today, but thank you so much to Michelle and Logan for being here. I learned so much, and I hope that those listening learned a lot too. It was a really good conversation. And for those watching, thank you for tuning in. And if you missed part of today's live stream, don't worry, we'll have it available on demand on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And if you have any questions about this subject or ideas for future topics we should tackle, please send a message to Seed World's Facebook page or feel free to reach out to myself. And next week, my colleague Alex Martin will have some guests on to chat about stewardship and seed treatments. We hope you'll join us. Thank you and see you next week.